Well, I guess we can get started. I just want to thank everybody for coming. I'm Bram Wickstrom, and I've been doing visual art for almost 40 years. For the last 35 or so, I've been doing it with my mouth. But I guess before I go into more detail about my development and how I've used visual arts, we should introduce our other panelists here.
My name's David Knott. I'm the music therapist here at Children's Hospital.
And I'm Rosalie Frankel, and I'm the art therapist here. So we're going to tell you a little bit about many aspects of art and music therapy and about the use of visual fine arts as well. I want to start off by defining what art therapy is and have David define kind of what music therapy is, because a lot of people ask me that question every day. So art therapy is a master's level degree. It uses, in the coursework, you learn about being a therapist and also using art towards therapeutic goals. It's applied to the whole age range, from toddlers on up to geriatric populations. The classic model is a mental health model, but here at Children's I've been working with the medical population for 10 years. Before that, I directed a program for adults who had developmental disabilities along with significant behavioral and mental health issues. Before that, I worked in a school with special needs kids, so it really has a wide spectrum of applications. And also philosophically, I was trained in a very clinical model, so it was equivalent to a marriage, family, and child therapist degree. So I had that certification, as well as learning how to use the art for the whole continuum of treatment. So there's a school of thought that believes that art is inherently therapeutic, and if you create a safe environment for people to express themselves and create art successfully, then they will heal themselves. And on the other end of the continuum is the belief that you're very directive in your approach and you choose media and make continuous problem solving or directive kind of ideas about how to approach the art, and that is a more clinical model. And I find that I work everywhere along that continuum, and it's really nice to have that flexibility in approach depending on what the goals are of the treatment. There's also a physical aspect to creating art that is also really helpful in rehab situation for mind-body integration, crossing the midline, doing all the things that, many of the things that they do in occupational and physical therapy can be motivated by the arts. So that's a little bit of introduction to what art therapy is.
And music therapy has some similarities with art therapy in that there are a range of schools of thought. Music therapy is a bachelor's level entry field, and as Rosalie was pointing out, that in art therapy, there's similar in music therapy that there's a belief that music as therapy can be healing for the individual, just being in the process of creating music, experiencing music. And on the farther end of that continuum is the philosophy that music should operate in therapy, so that music should be serving specific goals that you're trying to address. And I was trained in an eclectic approach that sort of borrowed from both of these philosophies to basically meet the patient's needs that you're referred to see. So I work here at Children's Hospital. I'm a part-timer in the Child Life Department, and my role in Child Life is to support patients, young patients, as they are going through their hospital treatment. So music can function as a coping support. It can function to support their emotional expression, opportunities to express themselves using music. And I've also really enjoyed partnering with occupational therapists and physical therapists using music to achieve their rehab goals. So I wanted to kind of point out one aspect of music in that, obviously in music therapy, we're trying to find ways of using music to achieve their goals, the things that they are trying to do to help them get better, to discharge from the hospital. But music can also function within the family unit in a really profound way. Music can facilitate sharing amongst family members and between someone that has an injury or an illness and their caregiver. Just opening up the dialogue about what kind of music they're enjoying listening to, what kind of music is exciting for them at that time. This can often stimulate an exchange and sharing of information that can kind of help two people to see each other in slightly different ways. When I talk to new nurses, I'm always encouraging the nurses, even if they say they don't sing and they don't do music, encouraging them to just ask the young patients about the music that they're listening to, because that can often just stimulate a dialogue and get them talking about something that's can sometimes be unrelated to the medical experience, but often can kind of come back and help everyone involved. There's been some really interesting new research in the past 10, 15 years about how music can facilitate motor movement, whether it's organizing gait in walking, helping to retrain motor movements. And this is an area that I'm really excited about and I want to spend more time working in. I wanted to show some of the instruments that I use here in the hospital. One of them is a Q chord. And this is sort of an electronic Autoharp. And the way that it works is I can press a chord button down here, and then just by pressing on this strum plate, activate the sound. So the advantage of an instrument like this, besides the fact that it's electronic and it's really cool, is that I can position it really easily. So if a patient is having difficult time moving, or if they have really limited mobility, I can kind of tuck this thing between the IV pole over next to the edge of the bed and get them to play just by pressing a little bit with their hand. If I'm supporting one of the rehab therapists and the goal is to increase their range of motion, then once I get them engaged with me and interacting with the instrument and motivated to play, then I can do little things like moving the instrument a little bit further away. I can move it a little bit further to one side or the other. And oftentimes when they're in the act of playing, they're so excited about hearing that sound that it doesn't seem like that big of a deal to them to stretch a little bit further. But even though this is pretty easy to press down, it does require a little bit of pressure. Another instrument that I like to use is it's a DJ instrument. It's called the air synth, and it reads your hand position on 3 axes, up, down, side to side, and front to back. And so I'll demonstrate one of these unusual sound patches here. Right? So you can see how something like this, you can get a lot of sound out of it, and there's not even any touching of the instrument, right? It's just waving your hand over it. There are some other patches on here that allow you to create your own drum pattern. So it basically takes any input that you put into these 3 axes, and now it keeps playing this over in a loop. So we've got kind of a beat going now, right? So. So if I'm working with a patient and we're really trying to work on some of those upper extremity movement goals, then I can use something like this and we can get a rhythm going, and then just by moving your hand really slowly over the sensor, you can really change the sound of the pattern that you just created. So I wish that there was just one instrument that I could just get really good at and just use that one instrument, but as many of you all probably have really different music styles that you like to listen to, it's the same for the young patients that we're working with. And so often we're trying different things to see what's going to work, what's going to motivate them, what's going to be really interesting. And my latest discovery is this fine Paper Jams drum set, which sounds better when you plug it in through the headphones, but you're limited to a little tiny speaker here. But this, you can activate all of these drum pads with just a very light touch. Even just rubbing my finger, it really takes just that much pressure to get it to play. It could be a typing aid or a mouth stick. So something like this, obviously, again, it can be positioned, you can move it around. It takes very light touch to activate it, and it passed the big question that I have about all these instruments is, can I put it in freestyle mode? And it actually has a freestyle mode, so you can play with it, make up your own sounds with it. I have another instrument that I'll show you all when we get to the question period. Then anyone that's interested in checking out these instruments can come up and try them out a little bit. Okay. So.
God, I feel like such a dinosaur.
I'm in your camp.
Paints and brushes and things. I had some modifications that I had to deal with. I broke my neck swimming back in 1975. At the time, I was a commercial artist, designer down in New Orleans, and dove into shallow water and spent a year in rehab while I was at University Hospital. And it was towards the end of my stay there where I was using a mouse stick to type with and to turn pages and stuff. And it seemed like kind of a natural extension for me to start holding a brush in my teeth and doing it that way. And to hear David talk about the value of music and how much that helped me, when I was an inpatient and not able to get up and out, and it was a pretty depressing time. That music was, a great way for me to sort of, kind of distract myself from the problems I was dealing with. But it wasn't until I got discharged and moved home to my folks' house, where they set up a studio for me, that I started working really diligently. And the first paintings I did were really like scribbles. Those of you who know who Mark Toby is, was really kind of my departure point. I looked at the kind of squiggles and work that he did that was inspired by Japanese calligraphy, and just started filling papers full of marks. Gradually, those developed into more geometric shapes, and I started looking at artists like Picasso and Matisse and people that had kind of simplified forms. And although I still do work that is kind of purely abstract, I work kind of in a lot of different veins. You can see the examples of the work I brought in. Some of them have kind of commercial applications, and I belong to an international association of mouth and foot painting artists now. And I hope some of you get our cards and calendars that are mailed around the world. And they provide me with a nice income, and we get to travel the world for art exhibits and things. So it's been, something that since I studied to be a commercial artist, I was only too happy to kind of work with the client's desires and what they're selling and things. But it also allowed me the flexibility to pursue some of my fine art. But I was, I looked around to see where the art was going to take me, and I could try having art shows and such. Contacted the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation to see if they would provide some funding to pay for some framing so that I could go ahead and approach galleries and have a show and try and get my career going again. And I had a real hard time explaining to them that art could be, a viable career. And I had started volunteering here actually at Children's back in the late 70s, and was somewhat discouraged with the response I got from DVR early on, but decided to seek some funding through the Seattle Arts Commission. And at the time there were grants available, and I was able to secure, back then it was the CETA program, Comprehensive Employment Training Act. And there was already a fellow here working, I think as a music therapist, and then they brought in somebody else also on the grant. So of course the complications I dealt with, it was great to be paid, but Social Security didn't like it. And now I used up the trial work period that I had coming to me, which is not sort of reinstated, so I had some sort of complications with that, but at least it gave me some experience and some direction with my art that I didn't think I was going to have. And so it was really satisfying for me to not only be able to come and bring my my work to the attention of not only the patients here, but the doctors and nurses and therapists and such. I worked through the recreational therapy department, but mostly spent my time on the teen floors and in the rehab part. And it turned out to be, just such an invaluable experience that I did seek other opportunities to take my work to schools and arts festivals, and and at the same time working on my fine art that eventually did get me in with this organization that sponsored my work. So DVR did come around for me in the sense that they were able to place me at the Burke Museum. And so 25 years later, I still work there one day a week, and I just answer the phones and work in the staff areas. But I've been so inspired by the artwork that I see around me up there, the Native American material and some of the other cultures, that I can see that it's really, this international kind of movement to utilize art in a way that helps people get past, problems that they might be having, or a way to, express difficult times that they're going through, whether they have disabilities or not. So it's really gratifying to see that it's come as far as it has here. And I remember when I worked here, there were all these murals, beautiful murals around, which it was so astounding to see after being at University Hospital has a fairly nice art collection now, but back in the mid 70s, to see art on the walls, in a creative way was almost unheard of. So it's great to see Children's being an innovator and continuing to move forward. So, but I've got some sketchbooks we can pass around. And maybe Rosalie has something to add.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the concept of art can be kind of intimidating to people who don't define themselves as artists. And that is one of my main jobs when I approach anyone with art therapy, is to redefine it as not a process where you're focused on the outcome, but activity where you're focused on the actual process. So if you're working on something and you're having a good time and you're expressing yourself, then you're successful. If you happen to have a great result from your work, more the better. You can develop the skills and have a fine arts outcome, which is wonderful, but that's not necessarily what makes it valuable to get invested in the art. So I wanted to talk some about different ways that art can be an avenue for anyone to engage in. And that's really what the main focus of what I wanted to talk about today is how the art can provide choice, expression, help develop relationships, and all those things through the creative process. If you're not worried about the outcome, if you can just approach it as a form of play at any age, which is really what I wanted to talk about today. Unlike David, the high tech, I have exactly the opposite approach. Of course, there are computer programs you can use to create art, and I encourage whoever is interested in that kind of activity to do that. But I got my biggest lesson back when I was a new art therapist, and I was working with special needs folks, and there's this place called Art Unlimited in Oakland, California, and they were offering a workshop on adaptive equipment. So I thought, oh, I gotta go there, I gotta learn what this art adaptive equipment is. And I went there, and much to my surprise, they said, we really don't have any special adaptive equipment. What we want to talk to you about is using what you have and making it work for you. Now I know in OT and PT here, they do have some special tools, some special mouth sticks, some special other equipment that will really facilitate success in the art process. But what I really want to emphasize is if we see art as play and art about choice and engagement, then the possibilities are endless. The first thing I wanted to share was just this set of art cards. Now, this is a great way to start a conversation going and to see there's a million different styles of what is professional and acceptable artwork, and starting a dialogue and exploring what your interests are and what kind of art appeals to you and what it expresses for the artist and what you see in that artwork is a great starting off point, a point of inspiration. And then figuring out how you best interact with the media. Like Brahm uses his mouth, and he has a special adaptive tip he got from his wife, who's a dental hygienist.
Yeah, you can see what we did here. I'm sorry, I was remiss in not introducing my wife, Ani. I'd be lost. But since she's a dental hygienist and was able to come up with something that was soft enough and pliable that I could bite down on it without, sort of paint chips coming off in my mouth and stuff. So it's really worked well. But I've seen others that artists that work with like whole mouth guards, and things. So there's a lot of different ways to go about it.
With mouth guards, and brushes come in every size. There's long ones, there's short ones, there's round ones, there's ones that have the paint built in on top. There's little paint boxes. There's giant paint boxes. So really, it's all about your own success and your own learning curve and just playing and engaging. I even, with kids sometimes, I put paint in a plate and then use a car to paint with. I have a good friend who uses her wheelchair, the actual physical wheelchair. She goes through paint and then she makes these giant paintings with her wheelchair, and that's her way of painting and engaging with the art. So I just want everyone, like any artist, that you develop your own voice and your own comfort and your own style. And I want people to give themselves permission to do that in whatever way works for them. Some people will modify baseball caps or construction hats to be able to attach a brush in that way. The sky's the limit. That's what I really want to encourage and empower everyone to explore art in the way that they want to. And even if it's in the way that you are wait for that. If you are receptive, you don't have to be creating your own art. I've actually been an art therapist with patients who have directed me to be their hands. Now, some people say, well, is that really making art? And I would argue that many famous artists actually, back to the Renaissance days, and some of those Renaissance paintings were painted by apprentices with the artist giving them direction. And all the fine printmakers, they make the design and other people do the technical part. So it's really a matter of communication. So if I really am not making choices, if I'm really laying the groundwork for the person I'm working with to make every choice, and they are directing me in the process, then there really is the satisfaction of creating artwork. And Matisse, when he got old, he directed other people in the construction of his artwork. When he couldn't paint anymore, he cut out paper cuts. And those are some of his most famous and popular pieces. So really, it's all a very personal thing about expressing yourself and engaging with the art materials. Sometimes the background shape can give it form. I invite all of you to come and try these little fun things where you don't need any pressure or control, and you can play. And in art therapy, what you put on the page can communicate a lot to yourself or to someone you're with. It can be a starting point for a dialogue. You can gain insights and have avenues of expression. But you can just work to express yourself and engage with your friends and have fun. So I have these easels and things. You can come look, you can come try things. I know people who have even used just blowing paint, blowing ink as a way of forming shapes, and the sky's the limit. As creative as you are, that's how creative it can be.
I know for me, Rosalie, at home I have an art table that comes up much higher, so that I can use shorter brushes that I have more control over.
Right.
So depending on whether I'm working kind of in a looser form or in a more precise manner, it makes a big difference on how far away or not you are.
Right, and I mean, you can develop skill like learning to play an instrument over time. Ram already had a lot of art skill and then continued to develop his technique. And if that's the direction, that's wonderful. But I don't want anyone to be intimidated that they have to paint like Brahm if they're going to approach artwork, because really it's all about just engagement and exploration. And also getting out there and seeing art in the community, I think, is a really important way of stimulating creative ideas and all that. So that's...
Maybe we could open it up for some questions, or anybody have anything they might like to ask, or because this is like really an opportunity. Yeah, Chris.
Do you find that if you have a patient who was or is an artist or musician, that they're easier or harder to get going on things? I mean, I get like a lot of patients who, which brings my question to Bob. Did you go through a period where you were saying, oh, I can't do it like I used to, I don't want to do it, or did you kind of go through it right from the start?
I think a little bit of both, because I was really discouraged at the first pieces I was doing. But as a commercial artist, you do a lot of black and white, a lot of pencil, and pen and things that are going to be reproduced on the camera. And no matter what color you do it in, you can tell the printer you want it a certain way or whatever. And so I had spent a lot of time on just kind of black and white. And it wasn't until I started holding the brush in my teeth and started using a paintbrush, because I didn't have to bear down really hard and put any stress on my jaw or my neck or anything, that I started developing a sense of color that I really had never focused that much on before. So in some ways, doing it this new way opened up a lot more sort of ways to express myself and took my art kind of to a deeper place. So I'm somewhat limited now in the size that I can work at. I mean, I could work on little pieces and kind of piece it all together. But maybe something about the size of this tabletop would be about as big as I could manage. And I didn't do too many things bigger than that before my injury, but other times I've got a mural down in Kent that a commercial sign company was able to sort of take my design and blow it up, following my design. So I'm, like Rosalie was saying, working with assistants and other people to help you is certainly another way of taking it, a step more. I would love to work in glass, for example, or etchings or something. And there are techniques now that you can use photographically to make that happen. So it's worked both ways for me.
My experience with people who already felt they were skilled in art is really mixed also. I think there's sometimes more frustration in focusing on the loss for people who already had developed art skill. So sometimes that approaching art is frustrating initially. Whereas someone who never saw themselves as an artist, it's easier sometimes for them to be more playful and learn that they're an artist and discover they're an artist. But both groups can eventually become more comfortable in who they are and what they're doing and learn new ways to approach art and use their skills in a new way.
Now, have you used computers and stuff as a tool for visual art?
I haven't personally because I'm not a technical person, but I know art therapists that do that.
Yeah.
And also photography is another medium. And using those photographs, putting them on the computer, manipulating them, creating collages is another way that some people really enjoy working. And the work can be very powerful and expressive.
I agree with both Brom and Rosalie. I've had similar experiences. Sometimes patients that have had a background in a specific instrument and then they have an illness or an injury that limits their ability to reach that same level, and it can be really frustrating for them because they're still in a way, in a grieving space about what their losses are. But I've also had similar or different experiences where we're able to find a different approach or a different instrument, or even focusing on listening to music and receptive activities with music, like imagery, exploring other uses of music. There's a patient on the rehab unit right now who was a baritone sax player, and she's not able to play baritone sax right now, but she loves music therapy, and she was having a really painful day a couple weeks ago. Didn't want to do the active type of music that we had been working on, so we started working out a rehab blues, and she just belted out this amazing inspired blues about how tough some of the therapists are on her, asking her to do all these things, and then turned it around to putting forward some positive intentions about one of these days she closed her eyes, one of these days I'm just going to walk right out of this hospital. So I think it depends on the individual and where they're at in their process. But as Rosalie was saying earlier, we really try and find what works for that individual. And if I start down the road of using the instrument that had been their primary instrument, and it's clear that that's really not a positive support for them, then I'll try and shift my approach and see if there's something else that will maybe support them and help them during the time here.
Now, does with the technology that you have, I think of music as being such an ephemeral thing. It's played and then it's kind of gone. But with the technologies nowadays, you can make recordings a lot easier,
We
add to
can.
it and stuff?
Sure, and sometimes I do that if that seems like that's going to be a benefit for them, or if they're interested in doing that. And I didn't bring any of my stringed instruments, but I do have some more traditional instruments that I use here as well.
I have a music question. Yeah, if you'd comment on something I do, although it's not manual, following a piece of music with a score, and you don't really need to know how to read music. I can only read a G clef, for example. But you can tell when the music goes up and down, and you can tell when the other voices come in. So that's not manual, but that's an advantage for people who don't have even enough facility to use one of your instruments. For example, there are many scores online that you can bring up and page through them with a swipe screen that you can operate with a mouth-held brush if you can't even use a mouse. So this is maybe either a step down or a step up of what you're offering here. If you have any comments on that approach.
So the comment is using a score while you're also listening to music as a way of kind of deepening your experience with the music. Is that your comment?
Increasing your eye-mind coordination and general mental acuity. And music is not transient if you have the score in front of you. You can stare at one passage all evening and figure out why it works or it doesn't.
Well, then when you start adding lyrics in, it brings in a whole different dimension. Now it's, a piece of poetry put to music. So you're sort of combining the visual thing. It's one of the things I enjoy about the computer now, is if I'm doing a poem for my sweetheart or something, I can add my pictures and put the words and everything together. Something I wouldn't have been able to do just a few years ago.
What you're describing reminds me of another technique used in receptive music therapy, and this is basically a category that means listening to music, right? Experiencing music, not playing music, but listening. And one of the techniques that's used for relaxation and is sometimes used for distraction from the pain experience is to listen to orchestral music with many voices and try and stay with one particular instrument as you're going along through the music. And it's kind of a focused attention exercise. So you really focus your attention further and further into the music, so you're following just this one specific instrument. Now this is still an ear-based approach, and you're describing something that's using a score.
What you're saying, I do that too. In fact, the fugue is the perfect medium for that. And if you get one of those bombastic that everybody hates, Stokowski orchestral transcriptions of the Bach fugues, then each of the voices is played by a different orchestral instrument, so it has a different timbre, and it's easier to follow the individual voice as opposed to the original organ in which everything sort of gets mashed in together. Right. So that's one step beyond what you've just described, I think.
You can do the same kind of thing visually, visual guided imageries and things that are really relaxing and positive ways to kind of focus. You can mandalas, which are circle drawings, are used in many different cultures, and both creating them and using them as a focus can be very, very positive and a great distraction.
That's where this piece came from, this round piece with all these figures.
Yeah.
Was from
Yeah, another point, you don't even need a score. You're probably aware that the Windows Media Player, when you're playing music, they have the options for many visualizations of that music, so you can correlate the various aspects of the music with what you see on the screen. Some of them, the correlation is very loose. I don't think it exists at all. But there are some that actually have the waveform. It's called scope, in which it actually has the waveform as if you plugged your earphones, your player into an oscilloscope. And then it has the opposite of that. It has the frequency distribution, so that the bars, if there's a lot of no notes, the bars on the left will be higher. So trying to correlate that with what you see, with what you hear, may be a similar intellectual stimulation to reading a score.
No, that's really great. Do you, when you do this kind of process or exercise for yourself, do you find that is it a relaxing experience, or does it leave you feeling energized and kind of motivated?
It's exhausting if you do it intensively, but that's good. Then you get to take a nap or something.
Because I remember thinking that, with technology coming on, that it might sort of make, paintings, traditional paintings, kind of obsolete, that people will want to come home and look at their computer screen and, dink around on Photoshop and create all these wonderful images that are all backlit on a screen and everything. And it is great, and there's a lot of sort of, ability to explore your creativity that way. But I'm finding that more and more that people are valuing sort of more traditional types of sort of regular paintings and surface textures and things that I had never really considered that much before. But now I'm finding that, when I go to a gallery or something, there's a great Picasso show now down at the Seattle Art Museum, and you see how these surfaces get built up, and that sort of tactile quality adds a dimension that, doesn't really come across on a computer screen or even in a book. So.
Well, I often get referred to see patients before they get to rehab. I work throughout the whole facility, and I get my referrals through child life specialists, nurses, social workers, pastoral care. It runs the gamut. So there are some patients that I get to know before they even get to rehab, which is good, because once they get to rehab, they get really, really busy.
Right. And it's the same for me.
On that same note, how many times do you have to, or do you approach a patient if you maybe go in the first time and they're not ready to, do you go back multiple times and when, sensing, well, do you push it or do you hold on? I mean, just that balance. Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And I try and gauge it. I don't have any hard and fast rule. I like to give a patient at least 3 tries because, maybe I was off on a day or my approach, what I tried with them wasn't what was going to be attractive to them at the moment. But I also try and keep the dialogue open with all of my colleagues and all of the folks that are involved in their care, so I can sort of judge how many other people are getting involved during their time here. So if they're, for example, if they're really making a connection with Rosalie and it seems like they're really enjoying the art and that's a real support for them, then I might actually, if they haven't also given me the same kind of level of engagement, I may, back out of that kind of relationship because, we're trying to make our services, operate as broadly as possible. But then, the converse is if it's a patient that is really, really has a difficult situation here, and the expectation is that they're not really happy with being here and they're having a really tough time, then I can't really expect that they're going to engage with me maybe even the first half a dozen times in the kind of way that would give me the sense that we're really making something happen. So, and that is a really challenging aspect to this. And I think for me, it seems like continuing to have a dialogue with the other people that are involved with that individual's care, it's helpful for me to make that decision about how much I need to push to try and establish that therapeutic relationship.
Right. And for us, the art and music is a real choice. On rehab and in other units, a lot of the things that are presented to the patients aren't real choices, and they have to participate. So I really do want to respect what they're saying to me, if they're to let it be a real choice. But I also want to make sure that they're making an informed choice. So I want them to really see what all the possibilities could be. And I want to make sure that when I'm presenting it, it's the right time for them to hear it. So I will make several attempts and tell them, I hear you right now, but I'll check back with you again and see if we can find something that would be positive for you, or if find a better time when you feel like doing something. So I try to keep it open.
If there's a way to inspire people, because I know if I go to
Right.
An art show, most of the time I can hardly wait to get home and try something out. And I don't know if that works the same way with music. You go to a symphony or something, and you have some musical abilities. You want to get home and bang out a few notes or something.
Well, I think the group, coming to a art therapy group or a music therapy group, can serve as inspiration too, because they'll see a peer engaging in something and they'll be more motivated to try it. That's another thing.
I was actually just going to ask you, do you do the therapy in a group setting too? And how different is that than approaching the people one-on-one?
Yeah, for art therapy, there's a few more opportunities for groups than for music right now. There is one group that happens fairly frequently, not every Monday, but most Mondays on the Rehab unit. There's a CIT camp, Constraint Induced Therapy camp, that both art and music therapy are involved in. I do 2 groups on the psych unit, one for the younger kids and one for the older kids, and a group in the hospital school, which is for patients who are here for 2 weeks or more. So those are all group opportunities that exist right now.
I do one group on the inpatient psychiatric unit, and then I'm also supporting the constraint-induced therapy camp as well. But I focus more on the individualized one-to-one work, and that seems to be what is working well for me right now. And hopefully I'm meeting the patient's needs with that approach as well.
Tell me, are there areas in the hospital here where some of the kids' work can be put up on display? I know when I worked here, we commandeered a few bulletin boards and things around, and it really gave the kids, a lot of positive reinforcement to see their work actually up displayed, as opposed to just kind of hanging in their rooms.
Well, 2 years ago, we did a gel and bubbles songwriting contest. It was part of a hospital initiative to increase hand hygiene compliance, and our very first patient that made a song for the contest was a young man that had a spinal cord injury, and he really liked beatboxing, so gel your hands.
Yeah.
Was his contribution. And then someone in our building and engineering department figured out a way of wiring a gel dispenser so that when you squished it to get the gel, it would play one of the songs that the kids had made.
Yeah. As for artwork, we have some bulletin boards around the playroom. We have been supposed to be installing a permanent art exhibit space in the 5th floor corridor, but that's very slow in coming, but it's a promised thing. There's artwork in the hospital school as well, and we did have a community art exhibit at Luisa's Cafe in Easton, so that's another possibility for art exhibiting. Confidentiality is a big issue, so whenever artwork is displayed, we need to make sure we have signed releases about everything. And I also want to make sure that when the patient approaches the artwork, that they are aware that it's something for display, which is different from something from therapy, because I want them really to remain more process-oriented in the therapy process. Oh, and the ceiling tiles. Oh, yeah. I almost forgot. Yeah, in the rehab unit, we're painting these acoustical tiles that are going up in the ceiling in the family room. Is that what that? Yeah, it's family day room. So that's a fun art project on the rehab unit.
Well, we had actually partnered with an art gallery downtown. It was a cooperative gallery. Mm-hmm. And so for the patient's works to actually be hanging, framed with labels, and we had an opening, and they were thrilled to get a chance to go down and pretend that they were bona fide artists.
Yeah.
Question here, an unfair statistical question based on your experience. Have you ever noticed that a traumatic injury like our SCIs either bring to the fore or perhaps even cause to arise a greater either interest or talent in music that might have been latent or might have been somehow magically inspired by the injury or whatever trauma the patient has endured?
Wow. So, what I feel like I've seen both here in my work at Children's, and I've also worked for 9 years at a skilled nursing facility for people with HIV and other life-threatening illnesses and injuries. I think that when anyone goes through that process of their life being, drastically changed, that there are forces inside them that that come closer to the surface, whether it's emotionality or receptivity to art. I think that there's in some people, it doesn't seem like it's absolutely everyone, but I have noticed with some people, and again, it's hard to say because I didn't know them before the injury, but there have been some times where certain music or certain musical experiences have seemed really profound to them, and really profound to me as well. So I don't know if we're talking about the same exact thing, but that's what I've witnessed.
One thing I've witnessed with adults and also teenagers, when they've been in the hospital for a significant medical issue or for rehab, there's been times when people have redefined themselves, developed a new identity, and part of that identity has been as an artist when that wasn't part of their identity before. Some people, I know one gentleman who was an engineer who never thought of himself as an artist, but then after going through some significant health challenges, that became a really important part of his life and the way he identified himself. And I have seen that here with some students who were not arts oriented at all, but as part of their kind of redefining themselves, they really found that art was a really valuable part and part of their future identity.
I think what was so surprising for me was to realize that there's actually like a movement in the nation for art therapy and sort of applied arts that I didn't realize was out there that ties in with education as well as just appreciation. Mm-hmm. And I see that more and more everywhere I go. And it's tough now that the economy has forced a lot of agencies and schools and such to cut back on those types of programs. But it's a lot of the slack is being taken up, and I'm seeing parents and other sort of arts organizations kind of help to kind of fill that gap that the government seems to be backing out of.
So, Brian, you mentioned inspiration, or what inspires you? I look at your paintings and they're all so different. So,
I guess it's just and seeing the variety of things here is what sort of inspires me. Is that I don't really know where my art is going to take me, and so it's one thing usually kind of leads to another, and sometimes I'll kind of go down a dead end maybe and kind of work at things, but more times than not, one thing kind of leads to another, whether it's a material I'm working with or the subject matter that I'm with, or working in a commercial vein versus working in a fine art vein. I have a gallery in North Wallingford that I operate with my older brother, and so I've developed some sort of curatorial skills that I wouldn't have considered even getting into. But the fact that I have time to do that, and I have the kind of support that I have, makes a lot more opportunities available. So it's just endlessly curious as to where things are going to go, and so I do a lot of guest teaching in the schools, but mostly elementary school and some middle grades, and so I'm hoping to kind of expand that a bit. And it seems like with art, and I'm sure with music as well, there's always another level to kind of aspire to, whether it's working in oils, which I don't normally do, or sculpture, or different ways of expressing the same thing that I'm expressing now with the means that I have at my disposal.
I'll interject. He works at the Burke Museum 1 day a week, so he started a series that I think was inspired by the Burke Museum.
Native American stuff, yeah.
And so he starts on a project, and I saw this with a lot of photographs that we did when we were in Venice, and he started doing the Venetian scene, and then he just kept going and going and going, and all of a sudden it was abstracted. You wouldn't have realized it was still the Venetian scene, but it was, but it kind of evolved into something totally different. So these, he's got, 10 more at home or something that he's done, and each one is different. And he says that it may not be the authentic Native American design, but it's where you're going.
Well, usually what I'll do is to use kind of the formal structure until I kind of get a hang of it, and then I'll start applying some of my own ideas and kind of exaggerating some of the forms and just kind of see where it goes. And often I'll do these smaller things kind of in the morning when I'm first getting started and kind of warmed up, because if I've got some larger, more detailed thing, boy, I sure don't want to get in there first thing in the morning and make some huge mistake. So there's a bit of a process to it. So it's, I keep thinking that my style is going to kind of loosen up now that I'm getting older, and my eyes are kind of starting to fade a little bit, and I don't have quite the control maybe that I used to, and I'm assuming that my art is going to change along with my ability to create it. And just like you were saying about Matisse and some of these other older artists, Degas and Renoir, for example, had arthritis so bad his paintbrushes were taped into his hands, and he was still able to create these really amazing breakthrough styles of art. So you don't have to look far to be inspired. And I'm very fortunate. I belong to a art organization here in town, and a lot of them are retired art instructors or illustrators at Boeing and things. And sort of to see them kind of diminishing their abilities but still finding a way to create is endlessly inspiring for me. I want to hear more of your music. What else you got?
Well, I think it would be really great if we could just have an opportunity for folks to come up and check out some of the materials that we have here. Got a table full of art supplies. I've got a bunch of instruments. I'd be happy for people to get a chance to try this out. I also wanted to show you this other fun little gizmo that I've got here. So, is this it?
There are not other questions. I want to make sure we're good. Sounds good to me.
And please make sure that you pick up a handout on your way.